The little house books I read came from the public library, usually off the paperback racks, the Harper Trophy editions with the yellow borders and spines. I loved the way the list of titles had its own rhythm. Little House in the Big Woods, Little House on the Prairie, Farmer Boy, On the Banks of Plum Creek, By the Shores of Silver Lake, The Long Winter. Of course, I memorized them. Little Town on the Prairie, These Happy Golden Years, the first 4 years. The words plodded along reliably, like the feet of Indian ponies. And oh my God, I wanted to live in one room with my whole family and have a pathetic corncob doll all my own. I wanted to wear a calico sunbonnet. Or rather, I wanted to not wear a calico sunbonnet the way Laura did, letting it hang down her back by its ties. I wanted to do chores because of those books. Carry water, churn butter, make head cheese. I wanted dead rabbits brought home for supper. I wanted to go out in the backyard and just, I don't know, grab stuff off trees or uproot things off the ground and bring it all inside in a basket and have my parents say, "My land, what a harvest." A lot of what I learned about being a girl, I learned from Laura Ingalls. I discovered that it helps if you try to love your own brown hair as much as you love your paws. Though it helps to know that feeling bad about not having blonde curls is apparently a universal thing. That even little girls who live in isolated Wisconsin cabins, which is as far as you can get from fashion magazines, can experience it. I also have, this crazy theory that the scene where Laura gets leeches on her legs and on the banks of Plum Creek is a metaphorical preparation for getting your first period. So that when Laura finds it terrifying and gross at first, but quickly learns to deal with it, it brings us girls all one step closer to being able to handle, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret." Of course, you're welcome to disagree. And while I'm willing to accept many things as matters of interpretation, wherein your Laura Ingalls Wilder is different from mine, I'm holding my ground here. Laura is not a tomboy. I will not deny that Laura did some decidedly ungirly things in the books, especially in On the Banks of Plum Creek. I understand that haystacks were climbed and old crabs were taunted. I refuse to believe these things make Laura a tomboy. I will accept the TV Laura as a tomboy. She had a spunky demeanor and, like her TV dad, Michael Landon, an occasional tendency to throw punches. She had a string beanie awkwardness to her as she stomped around in her tight pigtails. Of course, in Melissa Gilbert's defense, I don't imagine that as round and dumpy as a little French horse is a type much in demand in Hollywood. Whereas the Laura who lived in those yellow paperback book pages appeared in those Garth Williams illustrations so much more unabashedly feminine, with her bare feet and the gently rippling skirt she lifted to romp through the grass on the cover of On the Banks of Plum Creek. I held that image in my mind constantly while growing up. In all its sensual freedom, it seemed to me the very essence of girlhood. I understand that Laura did more so-called boyish things because she was a pioneer girl. I love that Laura trapped fish with Pa and rounded up oxen run amok because she had to. Or maybe I love that she had to and still got to be a girl. My earliest years were spent watching my older brother Steve's life and trying to decipher all the ways in which I could or could not follow his example. I was fascinated with his Cub Scout activities, but eventually figured out that there would be no Pinewood Derby for me. My parents never discouraged me from so-called boy things like sports and other pursuits, but I could intuit, the way kids seem to understand, that my brother's world wasn't quite mine. I distinctly remember sitting in his room and flipping through one of his magazines, feeling profoundly bored and left out. Okay, so the magazine was Boy's Life, but it still didn't seem fair. This is not to say I rejected girl things. In fact, I was obsessed with long hair and long dresses. The hair was really the sore point. Mine was cut short, and sometimes, especially when I wore my brother's hand-me-down clothes, strangers in restaurants would mistake me for a boy. I thank God and the 70s that maxi dresses were in style, allowing me to own a floor-length pink gingham dress that I would have worn every day if given the chance. But it being the 70s, I was also one of the first generations of girls to grow up hearing the message that we could be whatever we wanted. What did it mean then that I wanted to be both a Webelos Scout and Superstar Barbie? So much well-meaning children's programming, like Sesame Street and Free to Be You and Me, encouraged us to defy social rules we had yet to fully understand. And yet the pink and pretty trappings of conventional girliness called to us too. Years after I wore out that gingham dress, when I was in college, I had a job at a preschool and watched one of the 4-year-old girls, whose hair was as short as mine had once been, race around the playground with a skirt on her head to simulate a wig. "Don't tell her to take it off," the teacher told me. "She gets upset." The world of the Little House books was so much less confusing, not just because it was simpler, as plenty of people love to insist, but because it reconciled all the little contradictions of my modern girlhood. On the Banks of Plum Creek clicked with me especially, with its perfect combinations of pinafores and recklessness. Consider the illustration on page 31 of Plum Creek, where you will note how fabulous Laura looks as she pokes a badger with a stick. Her style is casual yet feminine, perfect for precarious nature adventures. Being a girl sometimes just made more sense in Laura world than it did in real life. Boys are minor characters in the Little House books until Almanza Wilder comes onto the scene in the later books in the series. And even then, he plays second fiddle to those dreamy Morgan horses of his, as far as Laura is concerned. At worst, the boys in Laura world will hurl a few witless taunts, "Snipes, snipes," and are promptly told to shut up. At best, they might do something spectacularly stupid, like get themselves stung by a whole hive of yellow jackets. Remember Cousin Charlie in Little House in the Big Woods? Remember the illustration, page 209, in which the poor kid gets plastered with mud and wrapped up like a giant sad burrito, while the other cousins look on with vague disgust? Notice how most of them are girls? Notice how they clearly know better. It's yet another reason why tomboy never sounded like the right word for Laura. The Prairie, where the Ingalls girls played, was so empty of boys that it's hard to imagine that Laura would want to emulate them at all. Only once does Laura ever seem to be jealous, when her little friend Clarence in the Big Woods, who has a fancy outfit and shiny copper-toed shoes, comes to visit. She loves his shoes, but as the book states, little girls didn't wear copper toes. Her one pang of boy envy, and it's about fashion. I don't have a sister, but for a time, while growing up, I had Laura Ingalls. Girlhood felt like an unknown territory, but I loved that Laura world was full of wide open spaces that expressed possibility. One frontier stood for another.
You've been listening to a snippet of Livewire, the radio variety show that's like a chew toy for your brain. For more information about the show or to download our podcast, visit livewireradio.org.